Hello everybody, what's up? You're listening to I Was Just Wondering with Tom Salmon, the podcast that dives into music, film and games, and everything else in between. My guests on this week's episode are writer-director Paul Spurrier and David Allen Cluck, the creative team behind the three-part television series Eullenia, starring Alec Newman and Vithaya Pansringarm. Eullenia tells the story of wealthy businessman Marcus Hammond and his dark obsession to find the perfect deal in Bangkok, Thailand. We jumped into Paul and David's experience of how they met working in the Thai film industry, how the dark side of successful businessmen like Steve Jobs influenced the characters and story of Eullenia, and what's it like filming at the famous aeroplane graveyard and avoiding Bangkok jail. So, if you're running, stuck in a traffic jam, or sitting behind a desk at work, I hope you enjoy my interview with Paul and David. So just a little introduction to start with. Who are you and what are your roles in the project?
I'll start. I'm Paul Spurrier. I was the director and I suppose creator of this. And with me here is...
This is David Cluck. I was the producer on the project, and this is Paul and I's third collaboration?
I think so, yes.
Yeah, here in Thailand. And I was, Paul's actually being quite modest. Paul was not just the director on the project. He wrote the script. He was the cinematographer, editor, and composer as well. And then Paul's wife, Nui, who's not with us on this interview, she was also one of the producers and, was a great contributor to the production in terms of overall help as well.
What's Eullenia about, and why did you want to make this miniseries?
Well, obviously, I've been in Thailand now for about 15 years, I think. I first came over to shoot my first feature film in Thailand, which is called P, which is currently on Netflix, and basically never left. Mm-hmm. We made another film called The Forest, which also went out on Netflix and is now on Amazon. And so then, so I was pretty much, I wouldn't say I was stuck in Thailand. That sounds rather negative, but I made a home here and a family and a life here. And obviously I was always looking for the stories to tell in Thailand. And trying to find something a little different. A lot of action films, sort of martial arts-based films are made here for obvious reasons, because of the great Thai boxing. And then, there were the stories of the lonely tourist expat who comes to Thailand and falls in love with a Thai bar girl. Which, we've all read books and seen. And so really I thought there were so many other stories to tell here. And obviously, one of them is about the people who misbehave in Thailand and the expats, the foreigners, and the exploitation. And so I came up with this very dark story of this one man, Marcus Hammond, a billionaire who sets up business in Thailand, in Asia, but who has a very dark secret, and it really gets quite dark, wouldn't you say, David?
Yeah, it's not your average story in a good way. It is pretty dark. I think some people find it a bit shocking because it's not. It does take you a bit of a surprise in the first episode until you really find out what's going on. But it's I think for me the genius of the script, and especially in the first episode, is that you sort of think you know what's going on. You think you're sort of on to, okay, this is one of these kinds of stories. And then it just takes a very interesting twist. And then the subsequent of these first three episodes, the subsequent storyline, it just gets more interesting because then the audience is sort of learning about this character and sort of his rationale, his justification, his self-righteousness to a degree in terms of his particular path and what he thinks is acceptable, why he thinks it is acceptable, and but there's also, of course, then our young lady plays Alec, who is who basically forces our hero, quote unquote, to meet his match in a great way.
Right.
And that's avoid too much of the story, but it is complex and it's very satisfying ending.
So just sort of jumping back to the very beginning to frame the creative journey of this project. I mean, Paul and David, you sort of mentioned you worked together as a director-producer team on The Forest, and I believe, did you what was the other project you worked on?
Funny enough, the first time we met and worked together, David was, I suppose, my client in a way. He came to Thailand to make a film called Formosa Betrayed.
Right.
And we never, it was actually set in Taiwan, but I think David's a little dyslexic. We never actually told him it got the wrong country, so he ended up filming it in Thailand.
I bought a plane ticket, I get off, and here I am, right? And they're like, yes, sure, perfect.
Absolutely.
Stay. No, it was actually, Formosa Betrayed was a period drama set in 1980, political drama, loosely based on some true incidents that happened, set in Taiwan in 1981. For political reasons and logistical reasons, it was not really feasible for us to shoot in Taiwan. And I'd had a number of friends who had worked in Thailand. And after doing some research, I found a company that Paul at the time was associated with and hired a production services firm. And we shot for 2 weeks in Chicago and then for 5 weeks in Bangkok on that movie. And that was where Paul and I first worked together. Paul was our sort of our point person on the production side. So my first experience with Paul was more of a line producer type,
right,
because Paul was more of an all-around filmmaker kind of guy.
Thailand has actually become a very popular place to make films. Mm-hmm. I mean, just about every Vietnam War film ever made has been, shot in Thailand. And right now, Sergio was shot here. Extraction with Luke Hemsworth.
The Five Bloods.
They were all shot in Thailand. So we were expecting a very good year this year. Last year was a record year for production in Thailand, for international production.
Yeah. I just want to jump into, you worked in a sort of professional capacity. I mean, clearly you're friends. So I just wondered what those sort of initial conversations were and how you felt that you could potentially sort of like work together in sort of a bigger capacity.
Well, I think, again, it probably came about because of our mutual sort of respect and appreciation for the crews and the filmmaking that you could do in Thailand. I obviously came from England originally and worked there and made a film and living there. But, when I first came over to Thailand and I discovered, the crews and the talent and the locations and of course the weather's not bad either. Mm-hmm.
Food's pretty good.
The food's pretty good, yeah. It was, wow, this is really a place that is kind of not only like efficient and but also actually creatively inspiring. Mm. And I don't want to speak for David, but I suspect that after that first experience, he was like me, looking for ways to realize this potential. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, for me, it was a matter of after doing Formosa Betrayed, and then I started coming back, just sort of on holiday and spending time here. And so immediately, just because Paul and I had remained friends and, talked about collaborating on ideas, and it was like, well, let's find something. We got to make do something here. It's the crews are great. It's a fun place to work. And like Paul said, the city, the Bangkok is I always liked what Zach Galifianakis said when he was interviewed about doing Hangover 2 here. He said, right, Bangkok is the most unboring city on the planet. And it's true. And to me, that lends to great storytelling. It's visually stunning city. There is a bit of a Wild West element to it, but there's also a very high-tech element to it, which I didn't expect at all when I first came here, and how advanced it is, and then how creative and talented most of the crew members are. The art departments, the graphics people, the camera, grip, electric departments, these are incredibly dedicated, hardworking, fun, interested, and interesting folks, which is nice.
And I guess that definitely informs the sort of like writing process, and especially for you, Paul. And I'm guessing right around the time you were sitting in front of final draft, the Virginia Roberts claim against Jeffrey Epstein broke, and there's also the Malaysian government. One MDB fund was being investigated for fraud and money laundering. I mean, did any of these events play a part in shaping the themes of the story? I mean, I know there's a lot to unpack here, sort of politically and socially and sort of geographically.
Well, look, the funny thing is that, in fact, a lot of this, what we see in the news, wasn't happening when I wrote the original script.
Wow.
So, I mean, yes, you're right. Certainly there are parallels between the sort of, the Jeffrey Epstein and our character. Maybe not in a sort of sexual way, but certainly in terms of, the exploitation, the feeling of being so powerful that your rules don't apply. I think in the past, I was brought up to always sort of, admire people who were successful, who were rich, who'd made something of themselves. And we always looked up to those people. And I think something's happened, at least in my mind, over the last few years, which is we've started to realize that being successful, being a great businessman, doesn't automatically mean you're a great person. Mm-hmm. And in fact, I mean, there's a statistic that says that, in fact, people who are incredibly successful, the entrepreneurs, the super wealthy, or they call the 1%, they're up to 10 times more likely statistically to be sociopaths.
Right.
They're something like twice as likely as most prison inmates. So, we're beginning to realize that some of the traits, some of the ruthlessness that makes you great and rich in business, maybe not entirely desirable traits. So, I mean, that was certainly something I wanted to explore in Eullenia. What is good, and somebody can be successful, but they can not necessarily be good. And I think, those are the things that we've seen. And look, Harvey Weinstein, the whole Me Too thing again came out after we had, started production.
Right.
And again, the same thing, realizing that there were some pretty unpleasant people out there who have had a lot of power and have been considered, great members of society up until the time the truth came out.
Until they're dragged away in handcuffs, yeah.
I mean, there definitely has been a dramatic reassessment of rich, white, straight males' influence especially within the film industry over the last couple of years. And just sort of drawing upon that a little bit more, I mean, what are your thoughts and feelings about that? I mean, I guess the film industry is a very sort of like broad church, but in your sort of like experience, and again, like I don't want you to libel or get into sort of trouble, but have you had any sort of like direct experience of being in the presence of these very, I guess almost sort of like emperor-like figures within your sort of like working careers?
Well, for David, I mean, I've had, partly because I work, in addition to working as a producer, I work as a first assistant director on a lot of movies. And I've been doing that for about 30 years. So I've come across a lot of interesting, fun, exciting, and sort of devious people, sadly. That is the business, and there's no point in trying to sugarcoat that. And it's not about naming names, it's not gossiping. It's just saying sometimes that's the people who get stuff done. It's not always the nicest guy who gets it done, and it's a pretty ruthless business, and sometimes you need a ruthless person to be successful. I mean, I had limited dealings personally with Harvey Weinstein when I worked on a film called The Artist in 2011, and Weinstein Company was not involved in The Artist except after they saw a cut of it, the finished film actually at Cannes, and they did a preemptive buy to buy rights for the U.S. and a few other territories. But Harvey was around when, during the award season, and I got invited to come to a lot of different functions and stuff like that. And he was around, and but I never had sit down intimate conversations with him. But you were definitely around and in the presence of a guy who sort of walked on air. He was surrounded by people. He was, you got the sense that he was very much in control of his domain, and there were people around him who were helping him on a purely business level. So I certainly never, luckily never experienced or saw anybody or had any friends that had gone through any sort of hardships with him. But he was definitely, enigmatic, fascinating guy.
But can I jump in? I mean, what I've heard, although everybody was sort of wanted to get in business with Harvey Weinstein for a long while because he had money and he could bring your projects to fruition. I mean, I think it's fair to say that not many people actually liked him. I mean, a horrible reputation as a bully. And I think that's what people, of course, people are focused on his sexual abuses, but in fact, it strikes me that he was just a horribly bullying person in business, in friendships, in all walks of life, and that carried over onto the way he treated women.
Yeah, and I think I made the comment years ago to somebody, or a couple of years ago, that my feeling about Harvey Weinstein wasn't that he should. I mean, what happened to him? I think it sounds like he's deserving of the punishment that he's now living with. But I think that irrespective of that, he should have been canceled many years earlier for just being a pretty devious businessman and a bully. I mean, I know a lot of people who had dealings with the Weinstein Company that really struggled to get their money out of them. There were a lot of lawsuits. There was a lot of manipulation, a lot of fraudulent sort of behavior. And so to me, it kind of goes hand in hand with somebody like that who feels they can get away with, screwing the average filmmaker over in terms of they might be owed in their royalties, and also then thinking, well, this woman wants to be an actress, so she better sleep with me if she wants to get anywhere in this business. And it's a permissiveness that they think they have, or this permission slip to be evil.
I just wanted to just sort of touch a little bit on the financial industry here as well, because that's very much part of the story. I mean, that goes hand in hand with the film industry as international banks and hedge funds and wealthy individuals provide funding for films. I mean, what's your experience been like working with film investors, and did that in a way inform the way that you sort of treat the financial sort of aspect of this particular story?
Well, look, I think I've been very lucky in that ever since, let me think, my first film in Thailand, some of the investors have stuck with me. And so we've always had we worked with a fairly small number of private investors. Because you hear so many horror stories about, the people like Harvey Weinstein coming in and changing the script, changing the plot, deciding who gets to play the roles, and unless you're careful, replace you as director with somebody else. And I mean, I think another thing that David and I have always shared is a feeling that you can probably get better work done if you're actually having a decent time and enjoying the process and everybody's working together in harmony. I mean, the 3 films I've done in Thailand and the 4th we're working with David, I think have been, fun productions. And I think that comes from, the investment down, that everybody has to understand that you're all working together and trying to make something good and to get on board it. So, I mean, I've spent most of my life trying to avoid these sort of horror stories of the evil film investment funds and things.
Yeah. I mean, my experience with that has been, I mean, for most of it, trade was all private funding that my former partner had raised, the vast majority of that, and then I helped with that. But other than that, my work in production, as a hired gun, certainly with an interesting collection of different types of financing entities and investors and hedge fund types. And, I mean, look at Steve Mnuchin was a hedge fund manager type guy who got involved in film investment, who's now the Treasury Secretary of the United States. It's an attractive business. And certainly, I think only a very, very small percentage of films actually make any real money. So you're actually, I think, pretty lucky if you are making money in this business. And so a lot of your smart, diligent investors sort of steer clear from film investment. So they sort of have to have a reason, whether that's the allure of it or they really believe in the filmmakers or you want to get that. And I think Paul and I have been lucky that we did have some people that believed in us, and frankly, and certain people, and they knew what they were getting involved in, and they got it. Were part of it. And we even turned down investment from some people that we didn't think were going to get it, that weren't going to be understanding of kind of the process and how we chose to work.
Well, look, the other thing that's always tricky about films from a financial point of view is that they really walk this uneasy line between something that is art and something that is commerce. And obviously there are films that are made that are entirely commerce, and then the other end there are films that are made that are entirely art. And if you're brave, you try and do both at the same time. That's probably the trickiest thing. And of course, the artists don't understand the capitalist investors, and the capitalist investors don't understand the artists. So it can be a powder keg.
So just jumping into the sort of creative process here a little bit, as you sort of mentioned before, David, you were a first assistant director on major Hollywood films like The Artist, Gold, and Ava. So what was it like putting your producer hat on again and reading Paul's script for the first time? And what kind of notes and feedbacks did you give him afterwards?
Well, that's interesting because, I had been following a number of projects that Paul had written. And when he first started sending me scripts and, talking about ideas, I always said Paul was kind of the idea machine. And what happened was we were actually working on the release of The Forest, which was the film previous to Eullenia. And it was going well. We'd made a deal with Netflix, and we had a small theatrical release, and we'd put a lot of personal elbow grease in making the theatrical release in Thailand something special. We flew the stars of the film, the two kids that were in the film, we brought them down, and it was fun to have a week with them here and be here for the press screening and then the week of release. So Paul and I were literally at dinner one night, and I said, okay, so what's next? Got to do something next, And that was just me, the business side of me saying, let's do something next. And Paul was like, I need to take a break, and I said, well, you don't get to take a break. We've got to do something. So he said, I want to do Eullenia. And I was kind of shocked because there's another project that he has that I'm a fan of. And I thought that was I just thought that was going to be his next choice. So I reread the script, and because it had been a couple of years since I'd read it. So I reread it, and then immediately we just started talking about, okay, well, how do we do this? What do we got to find an actor. I said that the biggest challenge, of course, is finding the actor, and a couple of key locations. So that was the first big hurdle. And then the second was finding these three young actresses. And Paul was sort of adamant from the beginning, which I completely agreed with, is that the point was to, with the Thai actresses, is that we wanted to go outside of the normal sort of casting avenues, because Paul was not interested at all in the kind of the Thai soap opera kind of actress. He wanted somebody that looked like they could have been from up country. They had a fresh and sort of a raw appeal about them. And so as we did develop and move forward with this on the business side as well as the creative side, we auditioned 150 girls maybe.
Well, to give a little background, there's lots of things I love about Thailand. There's some great talent here. But one of the things that has always slightly irritated me is that film stars or TV stars very much come from a sort of similar background. There's all the same pattern. It's very hard for an actress to get work in Thailand, for example, if she's dark-skinned or she comes from the Northeast or, has that the looks of somebody from the Northeast. And that just seems ridiculous. And so you tend to get the TV screens, filled by, light-skinned, upper-class Bangkok girls. And that just misses out a whole swath of very talented people. And now I understand if you're making things for a Thai audience, then okay, you have to cater to what the Thai audience needs. But we weren't. We were making something for an international audience. So I thought it was a real opportunity to find the talent that wasn't getting an opportunity at the moment and find new, fresh talent.
Yeah, and with good fortune, we did that. And obviously coming across Alec was great. That was such a coup for us. So that was great.
I mean,
and the fact he's a great actor and a really great guy, and so game and so adapted to the working style. So here's a guy who's started in all these BBC series and international movies and international series and doing the Paul and David show, which is a little different.
It wasn't like he was coming over with a whole group of other British actors. It was, him on his own with a plane ticket coming over to work on something with two guys he'd never met before. I mean, he liked the script. I think that's what attracted him to it. But now he was totally game and fun.
Yeah.
Who do you kind of sort of approach in that sort of casting process for that Marcus's sort of like character?
To be honest, we went to you do the normal thing. You go to agents, you send out scripts, you get you get screeners back, and you look at them, and very often, but you sort of get a vibe. You see somebody, and you just look at them and think, that's our guy.
Okay.
And sometimes it's in the acting, sometimes in the face. Something is something you don't really even quite know what it is. And then, of course, that's a dangerous thing, because once you've fixated on somebody, then if they demand way too much money or they're not available, you end up having to sort of change all your ideas. But we were lucky that Alec was on board and jumped on a plane and did it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he was great. He was a pleasure. So. And has stayed with us. He's remained a friend, and he's.
Funny thing, it was actually the same with the female lead, a Thai lady called Omkam. We were seeing it was virtually an open audition. I mean, we saw anybody, whether they had any experience, a lot of experience, little experience. People who saw a notice on Facebook.
Right.
I think at one point we even went and handed out business cards to taxi drivers and said, we'll see anybody. We're looking for.
And to give a little context, the way we did the casting here, and what's pretty typical, sadly, in Thailand, which I'm so used to casting in America, but it's not like people come in with a photo and resume. They just that just doesn't exist here. Some of them come in with, you may have a piece of paper with some of the series that they've done or something like that here. But most of the people we were looking at, the vast majority, a lot of them came from some friends who had a school, a film school, like an acting school. So we saw groups of people that would come in. And I remember, there were times here in the office where Paul would just, address about 30 of them at one time and say, so here's what's happening. We're going to call you upstairs into the casting room one at a time, and this is what it's going to be. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't that normal sort of, hi, come in, hit that mark, tell us your name, what's your agency, or your height. It wasn't that at all. So, which was great. It was actually very liberating. I think it was a very creative process with the casting, and it put the people at ease a little bit more. And the choice of Omkam, I can't quite think why, in retrospect, we picked her, because her English was very limited. Mm. We had to work through every scene virtually karaoke style. But there was just something about, I don't know, her personality. She had a certain charisma that I think both of us, the moment we saw her, we just thought, there's the one. It's always fascinating. You hear stories about how it happens, but that's really how that did happen. And just a funny story is that the girl who plays in the first episode, who plays Nam, was actually just a Facebook friend of mine.
Okay.
And literally, she had a good look, and I said, "Listen, we were just chatting on Facebook. I think we'd maybe met once in person." And she'd been living in Australia, and she had just come back to Thailand. And so I said, "Hey, I don't know if you've ever done any acting." She's like, "No, never even considered it." And I said, "Well, this might sound sort of silly, but I'm actually producing a little project, and if you'd want to come read, she goes, oh, that could be fun. So having incredibly low expectations for that we were totally surprised in how good she did. And she came back for a callback, and we said, well, she's the one. She was just fantastic. And she had never done any acting before. I don't know if she ever will again. I mean, she had a great time, but she literally is, she's living in Germany. She's, studying, she's getting a master's in hotel and restaurant management, and that's more of her dream. But I think she looked back on this experience and thought it was just a great time, and she did a great job.
So we sort of touched on it a little bit before, but basically Bangkok is a place of extreme wealth and poverty, and the poorest parts of the city are sort of slowly sinking into the river at the moment. I mean, what was in terms of just on a sort of like filming, sort of like scouting and stuff, did you come into any sort of issues of any sort of parts of the city you just simply couldn't enter due to the due to it sort of sinking?
You're quite right. There is a long-term problem with the land of Bangkok, but I mean, it's amazing. Thai people are very creative, and they will use. There are certain areas by the canals where they build their houses on stilts. So as the water rises, the stilts get higher. But I mean, look, the one thing that, of course, and it's a bit sad, is that we were shooting parts of this series in what they call the Klong Thai slums, which is one of the largest slum areas in Southeast Asia. And I mean, we didn't go in with, security and bodyguards. We were going in as a small team, filming in these alleyways. And we never felt, at least certainly I never felt threatened or at risk. And, the excitement of the people there to have somebody filming. And we virtually had to, force the people there to take our money because they were so excited. And then at the other end, you'll go to an office building, which you want to use for half a day, and they'll want, $2,000 just to shoot in this one room. And so again, it sort of reinforced to me this concept of greed and how sad it is that the people who have the most are the most greedy and demand the most, and the people who have the least are so generous. We found that invariably throughout the shoot. And I don't know, it taught us something, but it's also rather sad.
And then just sort of following on from that, it's a deeply sort of spiritual place where witchcraft and magic is a commonplace for the most part, and that's something you touched on your first film in P. So how prevalent is that within the sort of like culture, and was that something you had to deal with? Because I remember reading in an interview with Eat My Brains that you, for P, that you had it, the set was sort of blessed. Was there sort of stuff like that going on as well now?
Well, certainly. I mean, before the start of every production in Thailand, you have what's called a bung suwan ceremony, where you do indeed, you present gifts and offerings and fruit and incense and red Fanta. I don't know why red Fanta, but there's always has to be red Fanta. Apparently the gods like red Fanta. God, I shouldn't say that. I'll be cursed now. Yeah. But no, you do this, to... And look, I mean, of course, one could choose to say that it's all sort of superstitious rubbish. Certainly, I wouldn't ever say that. But the other thing is, it is actually a wonderful moment because you do it before the start of filming. And so you've got your whole crew and your cast, they all assemble, and you take this hour before you start filming to peacefully bless the production. And I can't honestly say whether I think that the spirits bless your production, but purely as a sort of meditative exercise to get in the right mindset and to get to know each other and prepare yourself. I think it's a great thing. I think we should do it in England.
Yeah, no, I can echo that. With every production I've done here, we've had that. And it's funny, I done some little behind the scenes, stuff with my iPhone while we were making Eullenia. And when we filmed at the house that you see where Marcus lives, the villa, what they call the villa, it was actually down in Phuket. we found a place down there that suited our needs, and we ended up packing everybody up and took 2 little trucks and flew the cast and the rest of the crew down there. And we stayed there for about 10 days. And we had a big Bunsuan ceremony there, and it was really fun. And I think I'll never forget, I remember taking video with my iPhone, and there was Alec, who obviously had never been through that process before,
right,
being his first time in Southeast Asia, but a veteran of so many productions. And he was genuinely moved by it. And because the other actors, Vithaya, who's certainly probably one of the most famous Thai actors there is, was very involved in the ceremony. He's such a great, kind, gentle spirit on set, and our other friends Sahajak and the girls that were all, our other girls that were in the film, and the crew. It was just a great time. It was
isn't it funny that, although some of what we were doing was really quite, you might imagine that if you're making something that's sort of dark and broody and unpleasant and lots of crying and whatever, that it's going to be a horrible film to shoot. Almost invariably, I find the opposite. That the comedies where everybody is meant to be having a lovely time are just
miserable,
evil offset. And certainly there was no tension offset. I mean, I always had a theory, because my previous 2 films have come under the they would be considered genre films, and so I did a lot of the horror film festivals. And I have a theory that I developed, that the more disgusting and perverse and vile and bloody and gory the film, always the nicer and friendlier the filmmaker. And when sometimes you go to film festivals, they made some extremely sensitive drama about the plight of Guatemalan sheep herders. The filmmakers are usually assholes.
Yeah. Finally, just the one thing that I just wanted to get your sort of take on in regards to this was that Bangkok is a sort of commonplace for rich and nefarious tourists to sort of sexually exploit young Thai women, and especially in sort of P, you explore that, and it just seems I don't know. I mean, I know things have sort of changed, but it definitely seems to form a very sort of clear economic function within that society. It sort of functions around that. It definitely is sort of seen as a sort of commodity, very sort of transactional, but it does help, and essentially does help people. It does put food on the table. And I just wondered what your particular thoughts were of that, and if that is sort of a misconception.
Well, look, I think it's fair to say that since 2004, when I made P, the economy of Thailand has improved enormously. And so that sort of, that nightlife scene of prostitution, I don't think is anywhere near as prevalent as it was before. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, obviously, but I think actually the way that has happened is the best possible way, which is that people have better options. That they now have more choices, that they can find jobs that can pay them a living wage in Bangkok. And so, because let's face it, I don't think anybody ever wanted to work in go-go bars, but it was a lack of economic choice. And so what you have to give is economic choice, which I think has happened.
And also what I found fascinating as well, that Bangkok and what's sort of Thailand is actually, it's independent. It doesn't have any national debt. I don't know if that's still the sort of that case, but it's sort of fascinating that they do have that level of autonomy.
Well, I don't know whether it'll be the same after COVID.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true.
Everything we've ever, I mean, look, that's the thing. We're living in very strange times, and we're talking about everything. Everything I'm talking about is based on 3 months ago. Who knows what the economy is going to be like? There's, the economy, the GDP of Thailand, 17% comes from tourism, and we've got no tourists. Does that mean that there are going to be less opportunities? Will we see a return of, the situation where girls have to work in bars? But if they do, who's going to visit them? I mean, look, everything we've known is up in the air right now.
Yeah. So I'd just like to sort of jump into a little bit into the the sort of filming, the nuts and bolts of the sort of the filming of Eullenia. So, David, how many weeks did you schedule principal photography for, and what kind of sort of logistical challenges did you face moving the cast and crew around sort of Bangkok?
Well, originally we had planned for 4 weeks of shooting, and we had set it up based on Alec Newman's schedule. So we had been, talked with his agent and did my typical AD sort of breakdown of a one-line schedule and went over that with Paul, and he was comfortable with it. And so that was then how we formulated our the construct of our deal with Alec. So we filmed for about 4 weeks. We got all of Alec's work done, and then we knew that we would probably have some more after that. I am partly the way we do things when Paul and I have worked together, and even with other productions that happen here, because it's not like a big union show that I do where you have a crew of 120 people and literally every day costs you $300,000. So we weren't dealing with that, and we knew that we would like to have the flexibility to get the work done that we needed with Alec, and if we needed additional stuff, everybody else we were working with was going to be around if we needed some time. And there was other commitments that Paul and I had literally just after we'd finished filming that we knew was going to take us down for a little bit. And I actually mentioned to Paul, I said, let's do a cut. Why don't you start cutting during this time? And so that before we jump back into, if we're going to jump back into, a big chunk of shooting or, week of shooting, let's make sure if we've missed anything that we can get it then too. And I'm just, most movies I've ever worked on have had some form of reshoot or additional photography. So I thought, well, let's just, the goal of this was not to make a schedule. Sometimes I'm hired on a movie, and the point is, we're not making a movie, we're making a schedule. Well, on this one, we weren't making a schedule, we were making a movie. And we owed it to ourselves and to our investors and our supporters to do the best thing that we could. And to me, that meant allowing us the greatest degree of creative freedom possible.
Well, the other thing, just to jump in, I mean, we've all seen the films and heard the stories of producers and directors, fighting. And the cliche is the producers saying, you can't shoot that scene. You can only have 3 extras. There's no more money. You can't have 2 cameras. And the director sort of rebelling and saying, I have to have more scenes, more extras, more money, and that being the clash. And I actually think the way that we work together, because David is not just, a money producer, he has creative instincts. And so, he wanted to give the film, all the resources we could get. I also think, to give myself credit, I sort of was, to a certain extent, financially responsible.
We kept saying we were having inverse arguments. I said, I'm thinking, no, let's go spend a little more time with this scene. Paul's, I can shoot this in a day. It's like, oh, maybe we should take 2 days. And really, it's like, no, I'm fine. I'm like, come on, you're supposed to be arguing with me for more time and more extras and more of this. Right. But also there was a trust there. I mean, it's almost to a second hand. We have a shorthand with each other, which was handy, but not without its challenges. Don't get me wrong. I mean, we would have some of our investor friends come, hold a boom mic, help us lock up traffic. It's like, guys, I need help here. We're shooting out in the countryside, and I need you to get on the back of this motorcycle and run down and don't let any cars through, kind of thing. Just, and that was the extent of their experience on film sets. And so that's what we did, is kind of dealing with those resources. But we had a small crew that was with us every day, just a small group of people, and they were incredibly dedicated and very good at their jobs, and nice people. And so that actually made it fun for us. But it did have its challenges. Finding the locations. I mean, Paul and I just spent days and days and days and days scouting locations. And I would call, friends of mine that were working on other big Western films, say, I'm looking specific for this type of restaurant. Do you know of any play? And then Paul would call his friends. And, and then we had some other wonderfully generous people that were just our friends and fans of our work, and said, oh, you're welcome to shoot at my place if you want. And we're, oh, fantastic. So some people were just incredibly generous, and they added so much to the movie because of their generosity. It was nice. But like I said, not without its challenges, but the work, the goal was to make the best film possible. So there was never any animosity. There was never any conflict of interest from a standpoint of we're just trying to make the best film here. And we knew what our resources were. And Paul is not the kind of director who just throws his hands up and says, I don't care what it costs. I want this. He gets it.
You sort of touched on it sort of briefly, but I just wanted to sort of dive in a little bit into the locations that you used, which are amazing. So Marcus's Bangkok penthouse apartment, the villa, the plane graveyard. I mean, how did you go about gaining access to these places? And were they particularly expensive? I mean, you have sort of mentioned that people were asking $2,000 for some particular locations and stuff. But how easy was it to get sort of access? And did you need to get sort of filming permits to sort of be there?
Sadly, I think, and the same I'm sure is true of, the UK and the US. 30, 40 years ago, the idea of somebody coming to film in your premises was exciting. And oh God, yes, come and film in my place. I think people have all got rather too blasé about these things. And so a lot of people now do realize, and quite fairly, I suppose, that a lot of productions have big money, and why shouldn't they make some of it from using their place? So, I mean, that's always a challenge. And I think one of the things that one always learns is that sometimes you don't get the place you want. And there were a few that we wanted and we didn't get. There was a scene that was meant to be at the top of a derelict building. And it was about an hour and a half out of Bangkok, and we drove there at least once or twice and scouted it and were all ready to film it.
Planned it all out. It's going to be a great sequence.
And then the owner sort of suddenly said he wanted 3 times as much as he originally had wanted for it. And I remember, having that debate, do we spend that money? And in the end, we said, no, we'll find somewhere better. And we found this, strange little tower in the middle of the Klong Toi area, and I think it was better. And I think it's something that you learn, that sometimes, what did they say? It sounds like a cliche, but every problem is an opportunity, or something like that, don't they say?
Well, your instinct kicks in, and you start to say, you know what, this doesn't feel right anymore. Especially when I think sometimes finding a location, like with any creative part of a film, is, you fall in love with it. You get a passion for it. And then sometimes you fall out of love with it. And that's happened to me on so many movies where I was like completely sold on something or someone. And then it ended up not being that case, and we didn't get that location, and we found something better. And I think you have to listen to your spidey senses when says, you know what, this doesn't smell right. Paul had put in a lot of time for this one location that we found, and we'd driven out there twice. We had to hire a van to take us out there, and he'd kind of storyboard and planned this whole sequence, and I was great. It was excellent. I was like, this is going to be really good, and then ended up not getting it. And at first, it was sort of devastating, but we definitely lucked out because we found better locations.
But then you mentioned also the aeroplane graveyard, which is wonderful because nobody really knows who owns that place. But there is a security guard who guards it, and his job is to keep people out. But for a certain amount of money, he will actually let you in to film there. But you have to go on the right day when he's in a good mood, and when the owner is going to be around.
The owner's not coming by. Yeah.
So again, you do what you have to make it happen.
Yeah. So it's and that's a little bit of for when you're working on a big Western production, and you have trucks and trailers and, like I said, 150 people to show up at a location. You better make sure all your ducks are in a row. And I think sometimes Paul and I would be like, this one, we can take a risk. We can give this a shot, But because a contract with a security guard who guards an airplane graveyard. I don't know how enforceable that's going to be in a court. So you have to go with your faith and say, well, we'll give it a shot, and if we don't, we'll come back tomorrow. We'll go somewhere else. And but so it kind of makes it fun, keeps it interesting.
I see. Mm-hmm.
I mean, you asked about film permits. I mean, we did have permission to film everywhere, apart from one location, which is at the start of, I think, episode 2, when Alec is walking through a park, and there was a park near us, so we had extra time, so we just went and filmed it. And indeed, the park police came along and said, what on earth are you doing? Where's your permit? You can't film here. But thankfully, the moment they turned up was after we'd had the take.
Couple good takes, so we were okay. just leaving, yeah. So, yeah, it was great. Mm-hmm. And I must say, like, with... like Alec's, the Marcus Hammond's office was, that was a big ticket item for us. And then obviously his penthouse apartment, that was a matter of finding those places and making deals.
Yeah, we almost got arrested there as well, didn't we?
Well, yeah, I think there are certain rules of like using drones without permission.
Yeah,
that was hilarious. We were shooting at the office, wanted to get these drone shots, and then somebody from one of the other floors saw what we were doing.
Well, they thought we were sort of like peeping Toms, using a drone to peep into their bedroom. And in fact, we didn't even know it was a bedroom went anywhere near their apartment. But I think they called the police and said there's some weird drone, the spies spying on me.
So the funny part was I was charged with getting Alec out of the building, and because someone said the cops are on their way up. And so I remember Paul got all of the cards.
Well, our priority was, I don't mind being arrested, but it would be rather embarrassing if our star was arrested. So at least get him out before the police got the handcuffs.
But I took all the footage we'd shot, all the cards, and I took Alex and we went downstairs to a little restaurant and we waited. And the police luckily never showed up, and we came back and we finished filming. So it was great.
So I just wanted to jump into the sort of you working as a director, because I know that you. I know, Paul, you started out as a child actor, and one of your first roles was in the movie Wild Geese, and it still plays to this day. And I just wondered, in terms of that experience, and then your career as a child actor, and then as an actor, how that informed you working with actors now, and whether you can very quickly develop a shorthand with communicating with them because of that experience.
Ex-child actors generally go into one of sort of three categories. They even end up, dying of a drug overdose, or they sort of claim they were coerced into it by their evil parents, or they end up in the sort of, where are they now category. So I'm afraid I'm not yet totally addicted to drugs, and I still get along quite well with my parents. So I suppose I have to be in the, where are they now? In Bangkok, Thailand is the answer. But I mean, look, I was very lucky at an early age to be around sets and to be directed by a lot of different directors and some very good directors. And I think, that's where I learned about what actors need, because I had been one and knew it. So, I mean, because you get different sorts of directors. Some directors are very much in the visuals. Some are very much in the story, and some are very much directors. I suppose I've always, your aim is always to try and cover all three bases. But I have a very long-winded answer to your question. But certainly I would say that, one of the most fun parts of it is working with actors. And again, Alec was our lead actor, took this part very seriously. And we rehearsed for a week before we started filming, which isn't always, you're not always lucky enough to do that. And we would fight at times. I mean, he would say, I don't understand why the character says this. And we would sit and we'd work it through until we worked out. And sometimes he was quite right. But I think, no, you're absolutely right. And so that process was, I think, very important in terms of working with the actor to get the character to feel real and rounded and authentic.
David, here, just real quick. I think Paul had a tricky duty because he had really two. It's hard to categorize them as two different kinds of actors, but I I think with Alec, of course, with Pooh, with Sahajak and Donut, he had actors that came to him with a lot of experience and also a lot of the tough questions, and which I welcome and I expect from an actor, to have those kinds of questions. And then some of the other actors, certainly our three girls who had zero experience. It was it's a completely different set of muscles I think Paul needed to exercise to get a performance out of them. And it was fun for me to kind of watch it and see the process go. And then also I saw how Alec and Pooh were also very supportive of their fellow actors and how they were great with the girls and helped to make them feel comfortable, because they didn't know what to expect. They didn't know what you can do, what you're allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do. Can you, do you push back on this? Do you just do exactly, what your instinct is? And I mean, we were lucky because Paul, like I said, he knows what an actor needs. He was an actor, and he speaks Thai, and he can communicate effectively very well with everybody on the set, whether it was the lighting crew or the actors and the camera, the focus puller and the makeup artist, so we could talk to all those people. But that was, I think, it was a particular challenge because it was you had some incredibly experienced actors on one hand and some incredibly fresh, inexperienced actors on the other hand.
I mean, the other thing I would say about not only working with the actors, but really the whole story of it, I think one has to understand that we weren't doing this within, a big studio system. We didn't have, network controllers and commissioning editors looking over us and dictating, the tone, the style, the content. And I've always felt that if you have that luxury, which it really is a luxury, to be working with a team of people to a certain extent where you have carte blanche to express whatever you want, you should sort of take advantage of it. And so the one thing we really were trying not to do with Eullenia was to play it safe. And so, there are elements that are as dark can be. There are elements of humor. There's elements of psychological drama. I think there are things that we did that you wouldn't normally get away with on certainly American network television and possibly not even on, the BBC. And so I hope that will give it a slightly different feel from the sort of things you normally see on television, where you really don't quite know where it's going from episode to episode. Right. And I think that what was very important to that was the freedom we had, the relationship David and I had working together, and the relationship with Alec, where he was saying, look, I'm not doing just a standard drama. Here we can go a bit wild. We can explore directions which we normally wouldn't be allowed to.
Yeah. And the fact that Alec took it seriously, and I think he took it seriously from a very professional standpoint, which I interpreted as, here was Alec, he's coming off to Thailand for a fraction of what he normally makes in terms of salary. So let's do something good. He's not doing it for the money. He's just going to phone it in. He's going to push back. If he's got questions, if he's got concerns, he's going to bring it up. And he did. And sometimes he was right. Sometimes Paul was right. Sometimes he needed convincing, and Paul was good about doing that as well. Right. And that you rarely get. I mean, so Paul, I think you handled it well.
Well, I think what the ideal scenario is when everybody is working to make the series better. And sadly, I don't think that's always the case. I do think sometimes you've worked on films where people have egos, where they're working because where their biggest concern is why somebody else got a bigger trailer than them. How early are they going to finish? What credit? Where is their name going to be on the credits? How many assistants do they have? Why has somebody else got more lines in one scene than them? And they're not working for the good of the whole thing. And I don't know. That must be horrible, I'd have thought.
I mean, sadly, in my career, I've witnessed that on so many films because all the films I've done are all different kinds and shapes and sizes of movies. or sometimes, like I said, it was just a purely commerce situation and the actors are in there for the paycheck. But not. And I mean, it was fun for me also to kind of, the only time I think I remember pushing Paul in one direction was when we were casting the police chief that who has to go and talk to. And I thought that who was also in the forest, was the right choice. I just thought, I think this guy can deliver. And I don't think Paul was adverse to it, but I just remember thinking, I really think is going to stand up to the Boo character in a way that has to be done. Because Boo is the intimidating character. You see his character, he's subservient to Marcus, but almost to nobody else. He's a badass. And all of a sudden it's like, we needed somebody that when Boo shows up, needs this information, and the guy's going to basically reprimand him and get in his face and give him that warning. And I knew Tu could do it, and I think Tu just delivered so well. And that one night of shooting, and he just did this one little cameo, and he was just brilliant, and he just nailed it. It was all in Thai, and it was such a Thai moment for the movie, which was great. I just loved it, and the beautiful drone shot for that scene, and just the way it was written to show the sort of the hypocrisy of powerful people, not just Westerners, but here's a powerful person in a Thai structure who also has a little bit of a dark side to him too, and it's super subtle. Most people don't even get it in that scene, but it's there, and you see that complex side of this guy, this police chief, and it's great. And then I just knew that he could pull it off, and I remember just saying that we got to get to and do it. I don't think we need to audition anybody. Let's just make the offer. And he came in like a friend and a trooper, and he was a great guy.
Just sort of looking back on the whole sort of process, overall, what do you think Eullenia says about society? Marcus's murderous obsession for the perfect deal. There's Boo's blind servitude. There's Nam's sacrifice, and a sister's quest for revenge. What are you hoping audiences will take away from this miniseries?
Well, look, I think as I've got older, I have started to see the world less in black and white. The more you learn, the more you understand that you don't know. Maybe that one of the first times I really remember that was when I was researching my first film in the UK called Underground, which was about that was ages ago. When was that? That was in the late 80s, 90s. I can't remember.
Was it 92, I think. Was it not?
You've obviously done your research. Yeah. You know far more about my career than I do. But
he is getting old. He's starting to lose it a little bit. Yeah.
And I remember being introduced to the drug dealer, and I'd had a rather sheltered life, surprisingly. But and I expected to find mobsters with machine guns, and it was this rather quaint little couple who lived in a house and had tea and biscuits with us. And it was my first realization that things aren't always what you have perceived, that there's always a gray area. And so one of the things in Eullenia was really to portray evil, but an evil that is not obvious. We've got a character here that I think if he existed in real life, a lot of people would admire him. He would be feted. He would be awarded. And yet, this very dark motivation. But we also didn't want to just create, a cliched, normal film type sociopath. And in fact, one of the things we worked was the hardest, I think, for Alec to deal with was the idea that we couldn't let Alec, the actor, think of his character as a bad guy. I really wanted to get Alec, the actor, to see it from this man's point of view and to play him as the hero. So I hope that when people watch that they see a complexity to the plot and actually are put to a certain extent in the shoes of this man who has this incredible compulsion for evil that he has tried to control and tries to deal with in the most humane way possible.
Yeah, and I think it's evil rationalized. It's evil reasoned. That's what certainly what attracted me to the story, and the revenge element too, which I love that kind of story. But the complexity of the evil and where it comes from his perspective, and whatever, not speaking on a where his psychological makeup may have come from, but purely from an intellectual perspective, he is completely rational and reasoned. And it's certainly in the third episode, when you listen to him, when he talks about this, he's never explained this to anybody before, and the way he explains it to Alec, it's I think that just says so much there.
So just sort of a final sort of question for you. What's your dream project if money and time wasn't an issue?
Well, one of the dream projects is to make the next 3 episodes of Eullenia. This was always created as 6 episodes, and might well have been right now had it not been for COVID interrupting us. So there are various little things we planted in the first 3 episodes that really need explaining, and we hope that. We went ahead with this idea of releasing these 3 episodes, and wouldn't it be great if people liked it and we get to make 3 more?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, yeah, there's one thing that sort of stuck out to me was the French ambassador's wife, who clearly seemed to have known Marcus and was sort of like left sort of like hanging. And I also like wondered, because I guess to me when I was watching it, my takeaway is it seemed quite novelistic in terms of the way the story was sort of laid out, and there were these sort of like bits that were out, and I always wondered to myself that yes, this is sort of 3 episodes, but it seems to be part of a much sort of larger story. Without going into spoilerific territory, what would those other 3 episodes look like, and how would the sort of story continue?
Well, the idea, the first 3 episodes very much deal with Marcus Hammond, the businessman. And the next 3 episodes take a slight twist and deal with his philanthropy. And so, whereas if you'd like, the first 3 episodes were a chance for us to have a little go at big business, at the exploitation of the third world, of the evils and tyranny of the billionaires in business and entrepreneurs, the next 3 will focus more on the wonderful perception of the philanthropists and charitable people, and the evils behind that. So, look, we can go on forever with this. It's really all about, pulling the curtains back on the people we admire and finding how horrible they really are.
Yeah, thematically, that certainly expose kind of elements there is nice. And like you said, one of the things, certainly in making movies, you never necessarily know. I remember Paul and I were talking about it, and we were talking about Breaking Bad, the series. And originally, I remember reading that in the original series, Jesse, Aaron Paul's character, was supposed to die at the end of the first season. And they basically said, you know what, we like him. He's great. We can't kill him off. So you never always know until you really get into something. When it comes off the page and that actor and that, the director put something on film and you're like, wow, this is interesting. So I think you're right that Paul would share with me ideas he had of things he always wanted to put in it. And I so certainly in the back of my mind, there's all sorts of little things that I've always wanted to explore with some of the characters. And certainly Kat Gray, who's a good friend of ours, who played the French ambassador's wife. She's got that one little scene. And you definitely, Paul had told me some very interesting ideas of how that could be explored even further. And I liked them a lot. So I'm not going to spoil them, but it's there's some interesting stuff there, and I think there's just some great characters there that came out, and I think I'm as a viewer, I'm curious. I'm curious about the Kat Gray. I'm curious about the reporter. I'm curious about the police captain. All those are interesting people that I could just watch for hours. So it's like, okay, well then I think we're in good shape then.
But of course, this has been a project that we've worked on for quite a while, and we put a lot of got a lot of time and effort into it. And of course, very shortly it will be out and there'll be a chance for people to see it. And, the competition for eyeballs, if you like, is tough. You've not only got the traditional channels, there's Netflix, there's Hulu, there's the satellite channels, everybody wants you to watch there. We're very happy it's coming out on Amazon. And look, we hope that people will watch it, and if they like it, tell their friends, and if they don't, tell nobody. And and then we get to carry on this story.
And what's the best place for people to check out Eullenia? Or where would you sort of direct them to, point them to go and check it out?
Well, it's the 24th of July. It will be on Amazon Prime Video in UK and USA initially. So I think initially you might have to pay £2 or something to watch it. Eventually, it will be for Prime subscribers as well, maybe a month later.
Okay.
So Amazon Prime Video, Eullenia, you can't get confused. There's no other film ever been made. I made a film called The Forest, and somebody else made this film with the same title the same year. But I think we're guaranteed nobody's going to make a series called Eullenia.
So there you have it. I had a great time chatting with Paul and David, and you can check out Eullenia on Amazon Prime right now. Just hit the link in the description box below. And don't forget to check out more great content on aruba.com, from film reviews, video game hot takes and top 10 videos. And why not sign up and become a member and share your passion for all things entertainment on aruba.com today. And you can like and subscribe to I Was Just Wondering with Tom Salmon on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Spotify and YouTube, and maybe leave a comment or review if you like. And you can support the podcast on Subscribestar at www.subscribestar.com/I Was Just Wondering with Tom Salmon right now. Thank you so much for listening. I've been Tom, and I'll catch up with you next episode.